Greetings all. This is Jody Roundhouse, back from a medical hiatus. Lost some weight. We're going to talk real quick about Hong Kong and what's going on with the protesters there. 5-6 months ago, Beijing, because Hong Kong is a semi-autonomous region of China. Yes, it is China, it's Chinese territory, but it's a semi-autonomous region, similar to Kurdistan in northern Iraq. Yes, they are part of Iraq, but they are given limited autonomy to govern their own area in northern Iraq. So that's what Hong Kong is. Hong Kong was a British territory that was given back to China in full control, I believe in the 80s, but I'm not sure. They were there long enough to westernize the population of Hong Kong, to bring Western values, Western culture into Hong Kong and into that population. And as the generations passed, it became ingrained into the national, I'm treating Hong Kong like a city-state, into Hong Kong's fabric. So, although Hong Kong is a part of China, they are technically a semi-autonomous region. And Beijing, under Xi Jinping, the dictator for life of China, he is very militaristic. And if you've watched any of my other videos, I talk a lot about the South China Sea and what's going on there with the militarization and creation of islands. And China is pushing out because when you do the same thing, I mean, if they're trying to expand out and they're trying to protect their flanks. Hong Kong is a seat of Westernization or Americanization, Britishization, I don't know what you want to call it, that they knew they would eventually have to close off. But it's detached from the mainland, so the mainland China, you know, in the subways throughout the streets, they use a lot of facial recognition through artificial intelligence and things. Xi Jinping is slowly clamping down on it, well, not so slow, clamping down on the Chinese population and insulating them and really taking care of dissidents. It kind of backfired here in Hong Kong. They tried to, under the radar, Beijing sent a bill to the leaders of Hong Kong, of that semi-autonomous government, for extradition rights. If somebody, China being a dictatorship, a communist dictatorship, if Beijing were to say, hey, Joe Blow over there, who lives in Hong Kong, he committed a crime, and we want him extradited to China to face charges. And China will execute you. They don't mess around. So if you have a growing group of pro-American, pro-Western youth in Hong Kong, you're going to need to eventually squash that. So, say there's a protest organizer who's well known in Hong Kong. Under this extradition bill, it would have allowed Beijing to legally extradite him out of Hong Kong and to Beijing to face treason trial. Probably they would charge him with treason or something and he'd be executed. So they tried to slip this bill in under the radar. Well, thanks to smartphones and things like what I'm doing right now, there's my dog Missy. I'm in my living room doing this report, the Roundhouse Report. Please subscribe, by the way. And the Hong Kong citizens caught that. They were like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on? Now, 10 years ago, they would have missed it, and it would have just been passed through. But with the technology we have today, the regular Joe Blow citizen, mostly the youth of Hong Kong, they saw the bill, and they rejected it. And they went out initially in the millions. Seen pictures, completely insane. Imagine a bird's eye view of Tiananmen Square and all the surrounding area, packed, building to building in the streets with just millions of people. It was insane, but it is China, it is Asia. So, you know, MacArthur said, "Never land troops in Asia on the continent. Never land troops on the mainland continent. There with China. Bad idea." I made a video about it, about the Korean War. Yep. Anyway, getting off track. So the original Hong Kong demonstrations had to do with this bill, this law, that Beijing wanted the government of Hong Kong to pass. It escalated so quickly that Beijing was like, okay, never mind, and they withdrew the bill. Okay, so the extradition bill is off the table. Problem solved, right? No, because by that time, the movement took on a whole new branding. Now it was all about pro-democracy. Huge red flag for China, huge flashpoint. Do you remember Tiananmen Square? Estimates vary, but and I know they vary a lot, this is a big range, But between 1,000 and 10,000 Chinese people in Beijing, Tiananmen Square, mostly young college students, were killed. They were slaughtered. And this was in 1993, I believe. You didn't really have smartphones in 1993. People don't know the full extent of what happened. And especially in 1993, China was much more of a backwater, obviously, than it is now. So they had much more control over media outlets and what got out to the world. But enough got out to know that there was a slaughter in Tiananmen Square because these guys were shouting for democracy. And they slaughtered in one night. They killed between 1 and 10,000 people. And I've even read report, just they slaughtered them in the middle of Beijing. I've read reports where they even billed the families for the ammunition that was used to kill their loved ones. That's Beijing. They still have that kind of mentality. So now they're faced a couple decades, 3 decades later with the same situation, and now it's in Hong Kong. And the timing couldn't be better because Beijing and Washington, D.C. are in the midst of the only trade war that has ever occurred between China in the United States. To my understanding, China has never been pushed with regard to the economic policies and the trade deficit annually. China is hurting from the trade war. If you look at any number of sources, there have been 11 delegations, and I believe all 11 Chinese economic high-level delegations, some mid-level, they came to us, and they're basically saying, please lift these sanctions, and we'll buy. I believe they agreed in phase 1 of this weird plan that they're trying to draw up. Phase 1 would be a commitment that China would buy $35 billion worth of soybeans and farming products in the next year, something like that. So you have this trade war going on. You have North Korea going on. You have us, the United States, putting more and more military assets in the region. You have Japan burgeoning. Because we've been helping them to now have offensive military capabilities. So China's looking around. Vietnam just came into the fold with the United States. Again, they wanted to sneak this extradition bill under the radar. They didn't think anybody would freaking notice. They noticed. It morphed into a pro-democracy campaign, except now it's 2019. I forgot to date this because this could turn into something like tomorrow. It's freaking like midnight on the 22nd of November, 2019. November 22nd, 2019. At this point, it's gone from millions to tens of thousands. So there are still tens of thousands, and now the protesters are remarkably violent. Now they're using Molotov cocktails. The Western media calls them gas bombs, which is bizarre. So I'm thinking maybe they have like a 5-gallon drum of gasoline, and they rig up some kind of a wick or a mechanism. They light it and then roll it down the street toward the cops. I have no idea what they're doing, but it's violent. The Chinese military, the mainland, Beijing, the Beijing military, China's army, they've been on the sidelines. There's been talk about them pushing in, but what did they do in 1993? They pushed in and killed a whole bunch of people, and the world was shocked. If that happened nowadays, now that they've developed so much economically, militarily, there would be a huge backlash. My goodness. Sanctions, the EU, good grief. The sanctions against individual Chinese government officials, the sanctions against China, the overall impression that China would create among all the small countries that it's trying to use economic blackmail against in Asia as well as in Africa, especially in Africa, mining resources. They use economic blackmail. The Chinese are bullies. So if they were to crack down on these Hong Kong protests like they did in Tiananmen Square, they can't. They can't because it would destroy them strategically. In terms of soft power, if you just look at geopolitics in general, soft power and hard power, it would devastate them. It would give the rest of the world a very bad image of China, obviously. It would give these varying trade blocs like the EU, the United States, obviously. We would inflict sanctions against China. Again, that trade war that's happening, they picked a bad time to do this because the trade war is hurting them, like I said. And if they were then hit with sanctions on top of that, this is a perfect storm scenario that Beijing is just probably terrified. Xi Jinping, that recently 5 days went by and Beijing didn't say a word. They don't know what to do, right? These guys in Hong Kong, it's morphed into they're black clad, they're wearing masks, they're throwing bombs, they're throwing rocks, they're using armor like shields and helmets. It's getting bad, and we'll see what the Chinese military is going to do. Again, they're 5 months in. It's been 5 months going on. What these protesters do is they completely shut down Hong Kong. They put bricks and they put barricades across railroad tracks, and they put bricks all along the streets, and they lay things across the subway systems. They're pretty hardcore about it. They're shutting things down, and it's just having a ripple effect that's it's not looking good for Beijing. I know they made a huge miscalculation. At this point, I don't think that, I believe that these protests began organically. They were westernized. They saw what China was trying to do, and they said no, and they took to the streets. Now, almost half a year later, I believe at this point, the United States has the CIA in Hong Kong heavily invested in trying to organize, finance, and share intelligence with these different groups, these different movements within the broader movement in Hong Kong, the protesters. Because Beijing, they can shut down the internet. Smartphones are useless then. Well, if we have the CIA that can share that information with the protesters, with the organizers, that would help them a lot. So I believe the CIA, as well as other NGOs, non-government organizations, are in there, but they're linked to the U.S. It looks better if they're a non-government linked organization. Financing, organizing, encouraging, vetting, picking out who could potentially be the top leader of this resistance if it does turn into like the next stage where critical mass begins to be reached, and it's like we either do something or the semi-autonomous government of Hong Kong is going to be overthrown. If it gets to that point, we're going to need a vetted leader. So we're probably in there. We're trying to vet people because at the crux of this is the coming war within the decade, I predict, with China. And if we have a bastion in Hong Kong, that's going to really hurt China. So they don't know what to do. We're in there. We are, the CIA. Sowing greater division. We're using our own propaganda manipulation techniques via the media as much as we can. But again, intelligence sharing is vital. If China shuts down their internet, what are they going to do? If they censor their internet, what are they going to do? Again, journalism nowadays is like what I'm doing right now on my fucking phone. Excuse my language, but it's just irritating because I shouldn't have to be the one doing this. This should be on the news. But 21st century has arrived, and we shall see what has been contrived. Like Hong Kong, I don't think that was contrived. That was an organic protest that has evolved into a pro-democracy movement involving tens of thousands of people, not just young people, mostly young, but also older people as well. People don't like what China tried to do. And so now there's a complete backlash. We'll see what happens. It's very interesting. So far, the Chinese military has been uninvolved. Now, I'm sure what they did is they just took their clothes off and they put on the clothes that a Hong Kong policeman would wear, their uniform. I bet there's lots of Chinese police and troops that are wearing Hong Kong police uniforms in the mix. I believe that. But an overt display of Chinese military operations has not been shown. But if it gets to that point where it's critical mass and it looks like it's the government of Hong Kong is going to fall, China may move troops in. That would be interesting. Again, they can't pull off another Tiananmen. It would kill their economy. It would kill their soft power image around the world. That China is such a bad guy, and they're very sneaky. I'm just saying the government, not the Chinese people necessarily, but culturally though they are sneaky. And they're very calculating, and Xi Jinping is highly nationalistic and highly militaristic. Is the reason why we're having this island dispute in the South China Sea, which is a fait accompli. China controls the South China Sea now. It's looking bad. It's all tied together, and Hong Kong is just that gave President Trump added leverage in the trade war, added leverage in the more hard power aspect with regard to the South China Sea. Just gives us greater leverage. It gives us greater leverage over North Korea because China is the main intermediary between the two, between us and North Korea. Bad timing on Beijing's part. They're probably kicking themselves hard, but it is what it is, and that's what happened. I had somebody look at one of my other videos, and they were curious about Hong Kong, so I made this. Hopefully they'll check it out. He's a Brazilian. So that's the Hong Kong crisis in a nutshell. I tried to be quick, but sometimes I repeat myself. What can I say? I'm an American. Please tune in for the Roundhouse Report. Now that I'm feeling a bit better with my health, hopefully I can contribute some more to the channel. All right, if you want to know about breaking news, military stuff, just hit me up, subscribe, hit the little bell, you'll get an instant notification. And then lately I haven't been posting a lot, so you're not going to get lit up from me. But Keep an eye out. All right. Ryan House report out.